This is Research Like a Pro, Episode 9, Report Writing. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the creators of the Amazon best-selling book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist's Guide. I'm Nicole, co-host of the podcast. Join Diana and me as we discuss how to stay organized, make progress in our research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go. Welcome, everybody, to episode 9 of Research Like a Pro. Today, we are talking about report writing. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Diana. Thanks for being here to listen to us today talk about one of our favorite topics of research, the research process. But before we get to that, we have a great review from Clyde. She says, I have done scattered wandering genealogy research for over 40 years. It's been fun, but I believe learning these techniques for becoming a focused planning researcher is going to make so much more fun. I'm excited. So thanks, Clyde, for leaving us that great review. I agree with you that it is so much more fun to feel like you're making progress, and we're so excited to be sharing all of our methods and ideas on this podcast and in our book. So Nicole, why should we write up our research?
Well, there are a lot of reasons we should write up our research. My favorite one is that I actually learn and make more connections when I'm doing the writing process because, as we look at records and record them on a research log, it's like the first time we see it. But then as we synthesize that into a report and start really putting it into our own narrative, and it forces us to understand it more, and we make more connections, and we often will find more answers to our research question than we even had before we started writing. So it's not just kind of like writing the answer and the conclusion, but it's kind of making sense of what you found even and forming those connections.
Yeah, it's really funny because I will often be writing a report and then all of a sudden I will find the answer to the question as I'm writing, and it didn't make a connection to me before I was writing. It's really an interesting process. So as we are writing our results, before we even start writing, we have to really think about who's going to be reading our research writing. So we might be just writing for ourselves. I started writing for myself years ago because I heard a teacher say you should write up your notes. And so I just wrote up my conclusions. I didn't use source citations because I really didn't know how to do that back then. And I just wrote notes and put it in my database. And it was very, very helpful. So we might be writing for ourselves. We might be professionals or wanting to do professional work and writing for our clients. Or if you want to be a professional, maybe you're doing some practice reports for friends and you would consider them clients. Maybe we are writing a family history book that we want to be handed down in the family. All of our years of research, we want to synthesize into something that the family will have. And then we might be doing an article for publication. Perhaps you've become a real expert in your area and there's a magazine or a genealogy publication and you'd like to submit an article about your family and your great research. So those are some of the different places where you might put your writing. And so you'll want to be thinking about what voice you want to use. And when I talk about voice, I'm kind of talking back to what we learned in high school or college. And if you remember, your teacher would say, well, there's first person, second person, or third person. So let's just look at a couple examples of that. If I was writing in first person, it's a little less formal. It's kind of how we are talking here on this podcast. I would say something like, I discovered the marriage of Florence. And so you're putting yourself into it. If you're writing in second person, it's also informal and you're talking more to a person. You're saying your grandmother married. And perhaps you would be doing that if you're writing a report for a friend or for, a neighbor, somebody you're doing some research for. Or you might be using it you might be wanting to write in the third person, which is more formal. And this is what I use for research reports and proof summaries. You would use this for a journal article, and you would say, Florence married Edward on. So just be aware that there's first, second, and third person, because sometimes as we are writing, we'll drift into one and then we'll drift into another voice. And so at the end of your report, you can go back and edit it and make sure you're consistent with all of your writing, whatever it was that you decided to write up. Okay, so Nicole, what do we start? How do we start with writing a research report?
Well, a lot of people like to start by going through their research log and just writing a paragraph about each search that was performed. And sometimes you might even want to consider writing as you go. So as you search, you put it in your research log and then you write a paragraph about it. And this is really effective for people who don't want to go back to the research log and write it all up all in one big report. If that seems overwhelming to you, you can just write a little bit as you go, and then it kind of takes the edge off the overwhelming report that you have to make. And then another thing to consider is that if you are trying to aim for writing a family history book or a narrative that kind of talks about all of the people in the family, you don't have to start with that. You can start with just making a research report about what you found. And then after you've accumulated a lot of reports about your family, then you can combine them all into a family history book or a narrative. And it makes it simpler than just sitting down and writing a whole book all at once. So break it up into chunks. And when you write a research report, just remember that it's a chance for you to record kind of the current status of that ancestor, like what you've found up to that point, so that if you have to return to your research a year or two later, you can just quickly read your most recent report on that person, and then you're ready to jump off into a new research project about them without having to go and review every single source that you've already found about them. So if you have reports that you've been doing and writing your conclusions, it really helps you in the future when you pick up your research again, right?
Absolutely. And also remember that you can upload your research reports or your writing. If you don't want to call it a report, you can just upload a paragraph to Family Search, and then that collaborative effort kicks in and cousins can see what you've been doing, and they maybe will take off and want to do more research. So it's an excellent way to share what you've done. A lot of times in the past, I have had cousins email me and they'll say, can you tell me everything you know about this ancestor? And it was so nice because I had written up notes in my database and I could just copy and paste my notes in that email. And it would take me maybe 5 minutes to answer that email. Otherwise, I would have had to dig everything out and go through this whole process of writing a complicated email about my research.
Mm-hmm.
So it has been really, really helpful to have things written up that I can just easily send off to people. So let's talk about some things you might want to put into a research report. I have kind of synthesized a process. And so for me, I use a research objective, background information, a body of the report, a summary of findings and conclusion, and then future research suggestions. And we're going to go through each one of those and just explain the purpose of that and why you would want to use that in a research report. So Nicole, you're going to start with the research objective.
Well, of course, at the beginning of your research report, you're going to put your research objective. In fact, we've talked about this the whole way through this podcast, that every time you do something, you put your objective at the top. So put your objective at the top of your report and then show how your research answered that question or didn't answer that question, in which case you would need to have some future research suggestions at the end for ideas how to answer it. Then after the research objective statement, you're going to do a background information. So you'll talk about what was previously known about this project. You can kind of summarize your known facts that you did in the research plan and talk about any family myths or things that were known before you started your research, just to provide a jumping off point for what you already knew before you started. You can also give some background info about the time period and location using your locality guide and just sharing what research is like in this locality, available records, obstacles to research like courthouse fires, and so on. You can even dive into some of the historical events in the background information to provide context, just whatever will help the reader to better understand your findings.
And sometimes I will go back and add some background information. Keep in mind that because we are writing in word processing programs, these reports can be fluid. We can start off and then we might have to go back and add more things. We can move paragraphs around. We can entirely redo the report. So that's the really great part of doing it in a Google Doc or Microsoft Word, that we can change things around. So don't get too hung up on the background information if you can't really think about what to write. After you've written your whole report, you'll probably have some thoughts come to you and you can go put some background information, in that section.
That makes so much sense, actually, doing that last. I've never thought of that, but sometimes when you start a report, it's kind of hard to think about background information. I get stuck on that a lot. So thank you for that tip.
Okay, good. Well, probably, and you said previously, just to start, take one source that you searched and start writing about it. And so that is the body of the report. That's where we are discussing all the things that we searched. And so there's different ways we can organize that depending on the project. Probably the way I use it the very most is to organize by record types. So I will discuss the census records, or I will discuss the probate records or the marriage records of a location and for a family. But you could also organize chronologically. Perhaps you want to just start with a person's death and then work backwards, tracing their steps all the way back to their birth, or vice versa, starting with their birth and then discussing everything until their death. So, especially if you're writing a family history, a book, you would probably want to arrange it chronologically. You might also want to arrange something geographically if you're doing a research report about a family who migrated. So you maybe would discuss all the records for them in North Carolina, and then all the records for when they moved to Alabama, and then all the records for when they moved to Texas. So when I look at my body of my report, again, sometimes I change things around as I enter in the information because it will start to make sense to do it one way or the other. So don't get too caught up on having this perfectly organized at the beginning. It's okay to just rearrange a little bit as you need to. So the next thing that you need to put in the body of your report is some evidence analysis. So you want to explain why you searched a record type, what you were hoping to find, and what you actually did find. And if you're doing a client report, this is to help educate your client, because your client may not have any idea why you would want to search land records or probate records. What genealogical information could possibly be in something like that. So you are trying to educate people. Well, if you're not working for a client, you're working for yourself, it's good for you to put those kind of things in too, because it will help you clarify, why am I searching in this probate record? What was I trying to find? And so I always like to put in those statements about, I searched the probate records because they can have name relationships and have information on death, whatever it is that you want to put in there as your reason statement for why you searched it. And then you're going to explain all the things that you want to about that source. You can talk about how it was an original source and the information directly provided evidence of the death date. Think back to the evidence analysis that you've learned about with the sources and the information and the evidence. And you can use some of those terms. You can explain that this was primary information. This was given by the mother, so the birth date of the child is likely correct. So this is a chance to explain why you think the information is correct, or you might have a source that has conflicting information, and you'll have to explain why one death date would be better than another death date, depending upon who gave the information. Now, this is also a place where you want to talk about your negative searches. So if you have been searching for all of the particular record types in a location and you didn't find anything, you could say that. You could say, I searched all the records for marriages in Georgia. And then you would do source citations to show exactly what databases you searched. And it gives you a chance to correlate your research log with your research report, showing what you found and what you didn't found and what that means for your research project.
So, when you're presenting information throughout the report, there's a few different strategies that we like to use to help make it more readable for the reader. And one of those is to use bullet points, especially when you're listing a lot of information from a deed or a will or a long document. This can help you share all of the information that's pertinent without overwhelming the reader. Another thing we like to do is use bold print and subheadings and try to really organize in a way that flows and helps the person reading the report know what you're reading about and why. Another thing you can do as you're presenting information is to add some background and contextual information as you go. So outside of the background information paragraph or two, you can add this throughout the report and just explain the background of the record, the background of the laws that created that record, and just kind of the history about why that record exists and what it might mean for the person in the report. And you can explain terms, you can do definitions, whatever you think will add to the understanding of the reader. Also, as you're going through, every time you share a genealogical fact or statement, you need to add a footnote with a source citation. So sometimes in your report, you will have information that is widely known, like historical information that everybody already knows, like the Great Depression happened in 1930. And you don't need to put a footnote with a citation for that. But if you state that Mary Jo's death date was 1949, then you need to have a footnote with a source citation. And it doesn't have to be a footnote. It can be an endnote, but typically in a research report, you use footnotes so that the person reading can quickly jump down and see where that information was obtained and then jump back up to the report and keep reading. And now, if you've already created a research log and you have all of your citations there, it's going to be really easy for you as you write your report to just simply copy and paste from your research log the citation into your footnote. And Diana always likes to remind us that the easiest way to add a footnote in Word or Google Docs is to just do the shortcut by pressing Control-Alt-F. And then you can quickly add a footnote. And I really do love this shortcut also. I use it too. So Control-Alt-F and then Control-C to copy your citation and Control-V to paste your citation. And you simply and easily added your citation into your report. And once you kind of get in the workflow of this, it becomes just really simple and easy, especially if you have two monitors where you can have your research log on the left side and your report on the right side, and you can just really copy and paste the footnotes quickly. So that's what we do with our source citations for a report.
So another thing that I just wanted to add about a good reason for using footnotes instead of endnotes is if you are sharing your research report with someone else and a page gets separated, all of the notes for that page will be on that page with a footnote. If you do endnotes, those could get completely left behind, and that would be a shame if you've gone to the work to put those. So just the thought about footnotes versus endnotes.
That's a good thought.
So yeah, it is. So talking about documents. So I talked a little bit on the Research Log podcast about how we would number documents. And if you're giving your report to a client, they're going to want to see all the documents that you found. And so as you are going through your report, I like to do this at the very end after I've rearranged everything in the report. I will, for instance, have a reference to a marriage document that I found. And then down in the citation, at the end of the citation, I'll say document 1. And then I'll have an appendix or a document file, and document 1 will be that marriage record with the citation underneath it. So everything matches, the document 1 in the research log, in the research report, and in the documents. So documents can be, like I said, in an appendix. They could just be at the very end of the report, or you might want to do a separate file. A lot of times I will do all my documents in a Google Sheet or a Google Doc, and I will turn it into a PDF. So PDFs are really easy for people to scroll through and look at. So anyway, documents are important to save throughout the project, so you don't have to download them all at once at the end of a project. So here again, it's annoying if you've done your whole project and you forgot to download anything, and then you have to go back and go find the source again and download. So what I like to do My workflow is that I create the research log. In the research log, I create the entry, and then I download the document right while I'm looking at it, and it goes into the file folder of the individual I'm researching, so that at the very end of a project, I can really easily find that document and put it into the appendix or the document folder that I'm giving to the client. So if you're not doing a client project, you're doing a project for yourself, then you would want to just put that document into your ancestors file folder. Just so that you know how I do my file folders for genealogy, I have a folder for each surname, and then within that folder, I have the individuals, and then each individual has his set of documents. And so sometimes I might have a document in a couple places if there are two people mentioned on it and I want to do it in that way. But often I will just have the documents be in the head of household and not necessarily put it in every child's folder. But it just depends on how you like to do it. Depends on the family, the project, what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
When I download those documents, it's really, really important to immediately give it a descriptive file name. Otherwise, you're going to have a file name that, looks like image 32516 or something that you have no idea what that is. So as soon as I download, I go right to my downloads folder, right click on the document and rename it. And I have a protocol because I want to have all my documents named the same so that they're consistent and they show up correctly in my folders. And I start with the date so that it makes it a timeline. So I will do 1850 census, Robert Royston, Chambers County, Alabama, something like that. And so I have date, record type, name, and place. That's my naming protocol. And so then when I want to go find that document, it's really easy because I've named it correctly and I can put all my documents in the correct order in a nice appendix or file. And then it's ready to go to the client or it's ready for myself. So documents are an important part of our projects.
Yes, they are. And I really like your protocol for naming the documents. Whenever I'm coming to that point to name them, I'm always thinking, oh, how am I going to name this? So it makes sense to create a protocol and then follow that for all of your research. Well, let's talk more about the body of the report. One of the things that we are doing in the report and as we present each search that we did is discussing kind of how they're connected. So we need to talk not just only about each search that we did, but how they're related and how the evidence kind of can be interwoven to come to a certain conclusion. So we need to put in some transitions and try to discuss all the different possibilities that are suggested by the records. If this record and this record are combined to show this certain hypothesis, then this is why we came to that conclusion, and so on. So really making connections between each document. Then another thing that we like to do in reports is add tables, add maps, charts, all different kinds of ways to show information and data that make it more readable. For a census, it's helpful to add a census table that shows all of the extracted information in a really readable format. And the same thing can apply to land records or indirect evidence. You can have tables for all of these different things. An example that we talk about in the book is when linking Mary with her sister Monica and her parents, James and Susanna, we created a table that shows the record, the date, the place, and then the details and all the evidence in those columns that provides evidence for the conclusion that we came to. So the tables can be used for many different things, and indirect evidence is a great way to use tables because indirect evidence just provides little clues and you have to put it all together like a puzzle. And sometimes just talking about it in a paragraph format is harder than putting it all into an organized table. So consider using a table when you're presenting difficult information like land records or indirect evidence.
I love tables in my research, and often it is when I am creating the table that I make the connections, because sometimes just looking at my research log, I don't quite put it all together because I can't see it all linked. So tables can be great help in making connections and in trying to help your client see what's important in the records. So once we have gone through and we've written out our whole report and we have either put forth what we found or what we didn't find, then it's important to summarize everything, come to a conclusion. And so I like to do this with bullet points, bullet pointing the key items. And I like to do a summary of findings because I found that my clients like to look at that first and see exactly what I found. And so I will put it at before even the report. So I will have a bullet pointed list of all the main points that I found. And if you don't want to put it at the beginning, you could put it at the end, and it could be your summary of findings, and you can basically lead the reader all through the report again. And once they've read it the second time through, they will understand a little bit better what it was that you found. So one of the questions we had from the Facebook group is, what is the purpose of the summary and how is it different from the conclusion? So the summary that I use, I put at the beginning in a client report. I create it at the very end of the process because I don't know for sure how it's all going to come together, but it's first in the client report. And I use an action verb to begin each sentence. So I would say something like, searched the 1850 census, found this family. Or I would say something like, researched the marriage records of a specific county. So putting an action verb at the beginning of the sentence makes it different from your report. It makes it have more motion, having that action verb there, and it just reads better. So that's a little tip if you're working with clients or if you want to just do a more polished product to create that summary. The conclusion is in paragraph form. And you can do some bullet points there too, but I tend to do more just paragraphs, and I don't have to put in source citations because I've already cited everything in the report. So in the conclusion, I just kind of wrap it all up in a nice, neat package. You know, I searched this, I found this proves, this is the evidence, it shows the objective was met. Now, what about if the objective isn't met? Then what do? Well, then we have to say, well, this was still really useful information because now we know not to look in this area for the family because they had moved. So we have to realize that our research is valuable whether we find anything or not. Negative findings can be just as valuable as positive because they show us that something happened that maybe we didn't realize. The family moved. That's why there's no records there. You know, there are conclusions to be made from negative evidence and negative research as well. So what do we do next, Nicole, for our very final thing?
Well, after the conclusion is where you put your future research suggestions. So as you're doing a report, you'll have probably some ideas for what else could be searched that you didn't get to this session. So you can just quickly throw them together at the end and put a list together of all the things you want to do in the future. Then when you're done with the report, you can go through that list and clean it up and kind of add specific details about where you would search. We like to list specific record collections and put the exact item that you're looking for in the exact collection you're going to search in. And this kind of tells yourself where to begin again, or your client why you should hire you again in the future, because I'm going to do this next, and this is why, and this is what we are going to find next. So here's an example. Search for the marriage record of Ignatius Bryan and Mary in Washington County, Kentucky, where Mary's sister Monica was married in the years 1795 to 1800. And I think it's important to include that date range within the research suggestion so that you can remember what you were thinking at the time, because you'll remember it better at the time that you're creating it, the report, than the next time you're coming back to it. So it really helps you. This section helps you to know where to begin again and exactly what you need to look for. It's really helpful for you.
Right. And I might add that future research suggestions, you can put those, you can be thinking of those all through your report. So the client might have hired you to search something specifically, but then as you're researching, you find all these clues to other things and you don't want to go off on these branches. So you can put that all at future research. And that's the same for you. You have a focused objective for your research project. And you might be discovering all these extra family members and you're so tempted to go looking for them, following those bright, shiny objects. Instead, you just make yourself notes, future research that in the future, you could search for this family that was discovered or search this record that was discovered. And so it gives you a place. It's like your to-do list. It gives you a place for what you're supposed to record, what you're supposed to do next. And it's so helpful. It helps you as soon as you pick up the project again, you hit the ground running because you know what you're doing. So let's talk about some tips. How can you, what have we learned over the years of doing this that will help you? So here's one of the things that I like to do. After I've written the report, I like to go through and circle all the passive be verbs, all the words like is and are and were, because sometimes we get to writing genealogically and it's very passive and it can be kind of sleepy and it cannot be very fun to read. And then I'll try to rewrite those sentences using action verbs when possible. And I actually have a list of action verbs that I like to use because sometimes, we need some help. And once I discover some good wording, I will save that in a document. Then I can use some of those terms again. So some good action verbs that I use are determined, revealed, searched, discovered, found. And that really helps me when I'm trying to do my polished final draft to think about how I can make my writing be a little bit more active and less passive.
Another tip is to eliminate trite phrases and take out excess words. And I love doing this because often when I write, I get all these extra phrases padded around the important information, and taking it out can make it so much easier for the reader to not have to read extra words that are unnecessary. And I remember my high school English teacher would always tell us, wordy, get rid of that. That's too wordy. And she would slash out all these different things in our writing. So I like to do that as well. Another tip is to be consistent with the voice that you're using, like we talked about at the beginning. So at the end, go through and make sure you're all in the same voice, whether it's second person or third person. Then, of course, we need to proofread and check the grammar and spelling and punctuation, but then also edit for content. Ask yourself these questions. Did I analyze each source thoroughly? Did I explain the reasoning behind searching for a particular source? And did I present the evidence clearly enough?
And one of the tips that I would add is to set your writing aside for a few days and look at it again, even if it's just overnight. Get up in the morning sometimes you'll be really, really tired of writing. And then when you get up, you can look at it and read through it. I like to print out my reports and I like to edit on paper because for some reason it just looks different on paper than it does on my computer screen. And I get out the proverbial red pen and I mark that paper copy up. I will find so many things wrong with that original draft. But then once I go back to the computer and go back to editing, I feel like I have a much stronger report and it's so much better. And another idea is to give your report to someone else to read. Give it to a family member or a neighbor or a friend. And they don't have to be a genealogist. Sometimes it's better if they're not a genealogist, and see if they understand what you've written. Have you made sense? Have you explained to them what you found? And that can be a really great way to get some help and some feedback on your own writing. And then finally, develop your own style and don't worry too much about having it fit in a certain way of doing things. You might read other people's reports and wish that you could write like that, but you don't need to. You can develop your own style. As long as you're being accurate, you're following good steps, your writing will be sufficient for what you need it to be.
Great. Well, that covers it for research reports. We are now going to encourage you to write your own research report. So here's your assignment. Using your research log, write about each source and discuss what you found or what you didn't find. Then make future research suggestions at the end. And if you didn't find the answer, start another research project. And we hope that you guys will share your research reports with us and we can give you feedback in the Facebook group. If you haven't joined our Facebook group, then that's open to everybody who's in the e-course, the study group, and who's purchased our book. So go ahead and check out or purchase Research Like a Pro, a genealogist's guide on Amazon. And it's available there as an ebook or as a print book, paperback. So check it out.
Right. Well, good luck, everyone, with your research writing. And remember, it can just be simple to start with. You can just do simple research notes if you're not ready to write a full report. Just write something. I think that you'll find it's really useful and it will help you feel like you've made great progress in your research projects. So, best of luck to you as you try some research writing this week.
All right. Well, have a great week and we'll talk to you guys next week. We sure enjoy doing these podcasts for you and we hope that you find them useful too. And be sure to leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, and that would help us out so much. Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Research Like a Pro with Diana Elder, accredited genealogy professional, and Nicole Dyer. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your own genealogy research. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or visit our website, familylocket.com, to contact us. You can find our book, Research Like a Pro, A Genealogist Guide, on Amazon.com and other booksellers. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.